reported in Da Nang as hundreds of thousands of refugees fight to get out. The U.S. consulate was forced to shut down today. Martial law was declared. A 24-hour curfew was ordered, and soldiers were told to shoot to kill anyone causing disturbances. So panicked were refugees trying to flee the city that they rioted at the Da Nang airport, forcing the U.S.-sponsored air rescue to be suspended for the day. Ed Daly, president of World Airways, which is operating that airlift, told Bruce Dunning what happened.
We finally, after beating them off, literally, the crew members and others, when I say they, I refer to the refugees. We only had 137 passengers on board, but we started the engines, used that as a means of getting the back ramp up, which we were using for loading. And as we were taxiing down for takeoff, we saw a group of approximately 100 South Vietnamese refugees out of Da Nang running towards the aircraft. The captain, Jim McDaniel, decided that he had more than adequate space. He stopped, lowered the ramp, and just prior to this first group arriving, from behind another building, there was a swarm of an estimated several hundred people. It was obvious that we would never have gotten off the ground. Their lives, the crew's lives were endangered, the aircraft was endangered. He immediately closed the door as he should have, or rather, a sensible thing to do, and he did it. Good judgment on his part, and took off.
There's a sea of humanity jamming on. We're pulling them on as fast as we can. We're pulling away. We're leaving them behind. We're pulling up.
That report from CBS News correspondent Bruce Dunning inside a plane at the Da Nang airport. South Vietnamese soldiers, terrified by the enemy's advance, fighting to get on that outgoing plane, fighting each other, kicking and beating women and children. Soldiers in panic.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Weekend News with Dan Rather and Bruce Dunning in Da Nang, South Vietnam, Peter Collins in Bien Hoa, Murray Frompson in Saigon, Bernard Kalb at the Pentagon, Mike Wallace in Los Angeles, Tony Sargent in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Haywood Hale Broun, tonight with a special report, Truman, the Nostalgia Years.
Good evening. Two major stories lead tonight's news. President Ford has signed the tax cut bill. We'll have details on that later in the broadcast. In South Vietnam, Da Nang has become a Dunkirk, with one crucial difference. Unlike Dunkirk in World War II, Da Nang is stricken with rampant panic. As the enemy approaches, the panic has swept from the coastal city's crowded back streets and pagodas onto runways at the airport. Ed Daly, president of World Airways, has been flying refugees to Saigon. But today, the government and the U.S. Embassy refused to guarantee airport security because of mobs rushing the planes. Despite that, Daly flew in today to pick up women and children. CBS News correspondent Bruce Dunning was among the last of the Americans to leave Da Nang late this week, but he went back aboard Daly's plane today to witness what was supposed to have been a mission of mercy. Here is Dunning's exclusive film report on the tragic results.
Reports from Saigon said thousands of people were roaming Da Nang airfield. But as the plane landed, this did not at first seem evident. But then people poured from behind buildings and revetments, racing on cars, jeeps, trucks, Hondas, and on foot, desperate to get to the plane and make sure they got on before anyone else.
One guy got on.
As soon as the rear stairway was lowered, the stampede of terrorized people tried to storm the plane. From the cockpit, the pilots reported by radio that the situation was out of control. Several times the pilots moved the plane, hoping to break the crowds around the rear ladder. There was no control. High-ranking officers in Da Nang have fled, leaving soldiers and airmen to fend for themselves. The hordes tried to jam up the stairway as Daly himself tried to block the stairs. As men clambered over one another, pushing aside women and children in their panic-stricken fury, members of the air crew dragged them onto the plane, trying to fill it as fast as possible. The tension and panic intensified. The heavily armed men were menacing. They left their wives, their children, their aged parents on the runway while they forced their own way on board, a rabble of young enlisted men. CBS News cameraman Mike Marriott and soundman Mai Van Duk dared not leave the plane, aware they might not be able to get back on. One newsman was left behind as the crowd pushed him out of reach of the plane. The stewardesses dragged people on and rushed them to seats, screaming all the while, "Where are the women and children?" They piled 4, 5, and 6 men into seats intended for 3. Finally, there was room for no more. The plane began to move as people still clambered up the ladder. Angry men left behind fired pistols and automatic weapons at the plane, determined that no one would go if they couldn't. A grenade went off under one wing, damaging it. Unable to move on the blockaded runway, the plane raced down the taxiway, swerving to avoid abandoned vehicles, perhaps even running over people. As the plane strained laboriously into the air, people were still clinging to the wheels and the rear stairs. 7 men fell off as the plane reached heights of 1,000 feet or more. As the plane reached 6,000 feet, 1 man was still stuck in the ladder. Daly had to climb out and pull him back as the plane swerved and shuddered under its heavy load. As calm fell on the smug men who had managed to fight off their friends and relatives to get on, the hard-working cabin crew took account. 268 people were on board, among them 5 women and 2 or 3 small children. The rest were some of the men whom President Thieu said would defend Da Nang. They had no apparent feelings about leaving others behind, only gratitude that World Airways had saved their lives, with a flight that Ed Daly intended for refugee women and children. Once in flight at low altitude, because the damaged rear stairway wouldn't close, the pilots assessed the damage to the plane. Bullets had damaged gas lines, and the plane was losing fuel. The pilots were not sure the wheels would function on landing because people had attempted to hide in the wheel wells. The flight from Da Nang to Saigon normally takes about 50 minutes. This one took more than an hour and a half. Another World Airways plane flew alongside, trying to assess the damage, and reported that the cargo hatches were open and full of people.
Do you think the nose gear will come down, or you can't tell yet? Can't tell. I don't want to check until we get in closer. That's the biggest problem I see at the moment here. Long 945 clear to Saigon. Something hanging down in my gear doors. It may be a body. Did you say a body? I can't tell. It sure looks like it. Could be. We had them climbing all over.
One man on the escort plane said that crew was praying for us on the damaged plane. Not knowing whether the wheel assemblies would hold, the flight crew put the plane, almost empty of fuel, down very gingerly on the runway at Saigon, and the deserters on board cheered. As the plane taxied to a parking place, soldiers poured out of the luggage holds. As cameraman Marriott was filming the unloading, a South Vietnamese Air Force security officer arrested him for taking these pictures. The Air Force had things under control again. But the men and women of World Airways had brought their plane and its load home. Bruce Denning, CBS News, back from Da Nang.
Officials in Washington reveal that the United States is quietly exploring ways of arranging a ceasefire in South Vietnam, hoping so that they possibly could evacuate as many as 1 million refugees if that should become necessary. A charter jet landed in Japan today with orphan Vietnamese infants en route to the United States. The babies are part of an airlift by World Airways President Edward Daly, who vowed yesterday he was going to fly out of Saigon 1,500 orphans. Well, that flight did not get off the ground, but did get off the ground, but with nowhere near the number he wanted. Only 54 babies were permitted to make the trip. Here's Bruce Dunning in Saigon.
A few children had already been brought to the airport, but they had an all-day wait as red tape tripped up one attempt after another to get more children cleared for leaving Vietnam. Finally, late in the afternoon, Ed Daly, owner of the charter airline, emerged to announce that although paperwork had been cleared for the children's departure, the adoption agency, Friends of All Children, had decided at the last moment not to use the plane he was offering for free. Daly angrily accused the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. aid officials here with sabotaging his plan. He said the U.S. and Vietnamese officials were retaliating for his unauthorized flight to Da Nang on Saturday to pull out refugees. A few people did choose to go on the World Airways plane, just a handful compared to the scores that daily wanted to help. But the adoption agency said the plane that World was offering was unsafe because it was not a fully equipped standard passenger craft. Bruce Dunning, CBS News, Saigon.
American relief agencies say there's no plan to bring great numbers of the Vietnamese orphans to this country. And if there were, state adoption requirements would still have to be met. Some Vietnamese children have been finding new homes in America for years, and more arrived last night.
The aircraft left Yokota, Japan, which is the site of World Airways base in the Far East. Earlier this afternoon, after arriving from Saigon, and I think you have the arrival time, the departure times from Saigon.
How did you get involved with the association? How did you get involved with the children?
With the children, Miss Maria Eitz of Friends for All Children requested aid for several different matters, and eventually we evolved to requesting help in getting the orphans from Friends for All Children's orphanages in Saigon out of Saigon. And that's how I became involved.
What has been your exact involvement? What exactly has Daly done?
You're speaking of Ed Daly, or are you talking about me?
Have you both been working on the same thing?
On his end, he volunteered to pay for and transport as many children as he could get out of Vietnam. He was taking that responsibility upon himself. On my end, I took the responsibility of coordinating what services we needed in the Bay Area to receive, house, feed, clothe the children, transport them from here to their holding destination. The procedure for delivering the children was in the hands of whatever agency was going to bring the children in.
How do you feel about the response of people in the Bay Area to the plight of the children and the efforts to get them home?
I think that the response in the Bay Area has been overwhelmingly wonderful, and all of us who are involved are very appreciative of every bit of offer that we have had for money and donations of goods. And I'm only sorry that we have not been able to follow through and talk to these people and get anything settled. We have been very busy making the preliminary arrangements for the children, but we appreciate every bit of offer that we have had.
Captain, we missed a few of your early comments on difficulties of getting out of Saigon to beat some of the pressure.
Well, it's just that they closed the airfield. The tower announced that they had VC on the airport. They evacuated the tower for a short period, turned out the runway lights, and they just closed it down.
How did you get off the ground?
They started the engines and taxied out.
Like so many of the post-war non-skeds, World Airways' future was uncertain. The early years of the airline were unstable, and it was doubtful the company would ever survive. But success